You are standing before a body that should not decay. The air smells of wax and sanctity, the kind of stillness that only death grants to power. You are told this man once ruled half the known world, yet here he lies, shrinking, silent, betrayed by the very flesh that once wore a crown. Before we open the tomb of this forgotten empire, take a breath. You're part of something remarkable, the living world of history lovers scattered across continents, watching from Cairo and Manila, from Madrid and Sao Paulo, from quiet dorms and midnight kitchens. If stories like this draw you into the corridors of the past, leave a mark, subscribe, share where you're watching from, and let's keep unearthing the strange afterlives of kings together. Now, the candles tremble. The year is 1833. The corpse on the marble slab is Ferdinand VII of Spain, his autopsy ordered, then sealed by the church. Two physicians whisper over the royal remains while a priest scribbles notes that no one will ever read. The body of the king is both sacred and scandalous. Outside the chamber, Madrid's bells toll a mourning that sounds more like relief. To understand why this death feels like deliverance, we rewind 19 years. Spring of 1814. The war against Napoleon is ending. The French are retreating, and the people cry for the return of their true monarch. They imagine a savior, young, wronged, chosen by God to restore Spain's soul. When Ferdinand crosses the border, they unhook the horses from his carriage and drag it by hand through cheering crowds. The air smells of sweat and wine. People press their lips to the wheels that carry him. "Viva el deseado!" they shout. "Long live the desired one." But inside that golden carriage the desired one sits in silence, staring at his gloved hands. He feels the weight of the word desired, and it burns like fever. In Paris he had been a puppet prince, mocked by Napoleon, locked away like a curiosity. Now he returns as king, yet every eye seems to test him, to measure his worth, to search for the God promised by legend. When he takes the throne, the dream begins to rot. The liberal constitution, born in Cadiz, is torn to shreds. Ferdinand declares absolute power his divine right. He surrounds himself with confessors, guards, and whispering courtiers who tell him the nation adores him even as famine spreads and soldiers mutter in the streets. His rule becomes a theater of ritual and paranoia. Mass processions, gilded ceremonies, and endless portraits of himself, painted always a little taller, a little younger, a little more complete than the man behind the canvas. In the private rooms of the Escorial, the ticking of clocks marks the hours of his reign. Courtiers say the king rarely sleeps. They hear him pacing, muttering prayers, sometimes sobbing. His physicians prescribe tonics of mercury and herbs. His confessors prescribe silence. At banquets he forces a smile, but his eyes dart to the shadows, to the door, to the faces of women who avert their gaze. The body of the king, so long a symbol of divine virility, has become his most guarded secret. When ambassadors from Vienna or Naples arrive, they whisper of it in corridors. They see the tremor in his hand when he raises a toast. They notice how his brides leave the altar pale and wordless. Rumors bloom like mold, that the king is cursed, that his body has betrayed him, that the man who calls himself the Desired is haunted by what he cannot fulfill. Yet power endures through spectacle. Ferdinand orders grand masses of thanksgiving. He parades relics of saints through Madrid as if holiness might mend what medicine cannot. He banishes liberals, executes reformers, imprisons soldiers who once fought for him. Each act of cruelty is justified as defense of faith and order. But behind the incense, the empire cracks. Colonies in America rise in revolt, and the gold of New Spain stops arriving at his ports. Still, the royal facade continues. On feast days, Ferdinand appears on the palace balcony, swollen with jewels, his face powdered white, lips trembling in a smile that never reaches his eyes. The people below cheer because they must. In that moment, Spain itself seems to bow to a ghost, the shadow of divine kingship projected onto a failing man. One autumn evening, a court painter records a portrait session. The king sits motionless in a high-backed chair, the air thick with varnish and candle smoke. "Majestad," the painter murmurs, "tilt your head a little." Ferdinand obeys. The brush glides, and for a heartbeat he looks almost serene. Then his hand spasms. The brush clatters to the floor. The silence that follows is unbearable. Outside, a clock strikes midnight. Inside, the painter bows and gathers his things, pretending not to see the tears welling in his sovereign's eyes. By dawn, the portrait will be touched up, every flaw erased, every hint of weakness painted over with imperial calm. The image will hang in the Hall of Mirrors, proof that the king is whole, that the kingdom endures. But the truth remains sealed behind the locked doors of his chambers, and in the heavy quiet of his body, Spain's illusion of divine strength begins to crumble. In the end, the only witnesses to the king's undoing are the same ones who will later open his corpse: the physicians, the priests, and the silence. And when they draw the curtain over the dead monarch, they do so not to hide decay, but to protect a secret the world was never meant to see. The corridors outside the royal bedchamber are silent except for the faint ticking of pocket watches. A physician adjusts his cuffs, another whispers a prayer, and all eyes are fixed on a single velvet rope that bars the door. Inside, somewhere beyond those gilded panels, Spain's future is being decided, or delayed again. The bell they wait for never rings. Years earlier, the palace had been a place of music, trumpets, laughter, the scent of orange blossoms. When Ferdinand first married Marie Antonia of Naples, the court proclaimed it the dawn of a golden age. She was clever, sharp-tongued, with the energy of a woman raised among revolutions. In her presence, the king seemed lighter, almost human. But beneath the jewels and ceremony, the same dread followed him, the weight of expectation. Letters from foreign envoys record what the portraits conceal. "Her Majesty remains in good health," one Austrian diplomat writes, but the king grows increasingly withdrawn. Whispers circulate that Marie Antonia mocks him behind closed doors, that she laughs with her ladies about his solemn prayers, that she calls him el devoto triste, the sad, devout one. Her humor was her shield, and it cost her dearly. Within 4 years, she was dead at 21. Officially, typhus. Unofficially, poison. Her body was interred in the royal crypt without fanfare. The same night, Ferdinand ordered the chapel windows shut and refused to eat for 3 days. But dynasties cannot mourn for long. The embassies of Europe offered condolences wrapped in opportunity. Within months, Portugal presented Isabel de Braganza, a cousin and daughter of the House of Braganza. She arrived in Madrid like a peace offering, pale, devout, painfully polite. The wedding was a display of diplomatic perfection. Silk, incense, cannon fire, yet the palace staff noticed the same old pattern. Ferdinand's dinners grew shorter, his walks lonelier, his nights restless. For Isabel, the marriage became a ritual of waiting. Waiting for the king to appear, waiting for the court physicians to prescribe yet another treatment. They called it balancing the humors, a phrase that cloaked embarrassment in science. Herbal baths, special diets, whispered consultations with Italian surgeons and Jesuit confessors, each more desperate than the last. Every effort was a ceremony of hope performed under chandeliers that glittered like false stars. The palace became half hospital, half shrine. Crucifixes hung beside anatomical sketches. Holy water stood beside surgical steel. When the court doctor, Don Vicente, dared to suggest the king might be too ill for an heir, Ferdinand dismissed him in fury. "God makes kings whole," he said to have shouted. "Who are men to doubt his design?" But even divine right could not conjure a child. Isabel's letters to her mother speak of deep solitude and duties beyond reason. She miscarried twice before dying in childbirth at 21, the same age as her predecessor. By now, the walls of the royal chapel were darkening with soot. the gold leaf flaking from the ceilings. Courtiers had stopped pretending the problem was temporary. The king himself had become the state's great medical secret. Every physician who examined him was bound by an oath of silence enforced by the church. In the salons of Paris and Vienna, Spain's decline was measured not in wars or colonies, but in the pulse of one man. Then came the third queen, Maria Josepha Amalia of Saxony, a girl of 16 with porcelain skin and the terror of a convent novice. She was so devout she refused to speak without a priest's permission. Ferdinand, by now in his 30s and scarred by superstition, met her with the wary reverence one might reserve for a saint or a ghost. Their wedding night became legend. Courtiers later claimed that Maria Josepha fainted at the sight of her husband, believing the act of marriage itself a mortal sin. Whether truth or rumor, the damage was done. The royal physicians, now veterans of failure, were summoned once again. They prescribed controlled proximity, a system of timed encounters, blessings, and consultations that turned intimacy into administration. Every door was watched, every symptom recorded. The king grew increasingly erratic, veering between tenderness and rage. Maria Josepha retreated into prayer, sometimes kneeling for hours until her knees bled. The confessor assigned to her wrote that His Majesty suffers the torments of Job, and the Queen is his mirror. The image of the monarchy, once radiant, unshakable, had become a theater of humiliation. Foreign ambassadors sent coded reports home. The royal body continues under divine trial. In the plazas, the people whispered darker jokes. They said Spain itself was barren because its king was cursed. In 1829, Maria Josepha died suddenly at 25. Some said of consumption, others of despair. The king's carriage followed her coffin through streets lined with silent crowds. He kept the curtains drawn the entire way, as though light itself were an accusation. By the time he returned to the palace, his power was fading, his body heavier, his gaze distant. 3 queens gone, no heir, and a kingdom rotting in rumor. Yet still the church spoke of miracles. Still portraits were painted. Still the rituals continued. That winter, the court physicians gathered once more outside the royal bedchamber, waiting for the bell that never rang. The air was colder now, and the silence more final. One of them, perhaps the youngest, asked quietly, "What do we tell the people?" An older man replied, "We tell them to pray." Somewhere beyond the door, the king muttered to himself, pacing as always, and above his head the flaking gold leaf drifted down like the last snowfall of a dying age. Through a tiny peephole cut into the wall, the viewer sees the king watching back. The scene is doubled, 2 gazes meeting through a circle of darkness, 2 prisons made of gold. The air beyond the hole flickers with candlelight, and in the mirrored chambers of the palace, every reflection feels like an accusation. By the time Ferdinand VII takes his 4th wife, Maria Cristina of Naples, Spain has become a portrait of his mind, suspicious, trembling, and endlessly self-surveilling. The courtiers walk softer now. Even their whispers are weighed for treason. Servants say the king no longer trusts doors, that every keyhole is to be stuffed with wax, every corridor patrolled by invisible eyes. What began as privacy has become governance. In 1829, the marriage is announced with exhausted ceremony. The bride is 23, graceful and practical, already aware that she is entering not a home, but a mausoleum. She finds her new husband swollen with illness, his temper uncertain, his body fading. Yet around him, the machinery of monarchy whirs louder than ever. Priests bless his food, guards salute every door he passes. Physicians keep journals written in a code of Latin and metaphor. His Majesty rests, they write, meaning he cannot stand. His humors are balanced, meaning he cannot bear to be seen. The palace itself becomes a labyrinth of surveillance. Aides record who enters which room, which servant lingers too long near which wall. Letters are intercepted and read aloud to the king, who listens with his eyes half closed, muttering judgments. Some he burns. Some he seals with wax and sends back with messages written in his own trembling hand. I see all. Spain, too, has become a mirror. Across the country, secret police watch cafes, monasteries, even classrooms for hints of sedition. Every sermon and newspaper passes through censors' hands. In Seville, a printer is jailed for publishing a poem that compares the moon to a dimming crown. The Inquisition is gone in name, but its habits remain. The fear, the ritual, the silence. Maria Cristina soon learns that affection must also be performed. She kneels with him at dawn prayers, recites the rosary beneath the painted ceilings, smiles through court dinners where the air itself feels watched. Yet she is not naive. The queen begins to write letters, carefully, secretly, to her relatives in Naples. Spain lives behind curtains, she writes. The king's mind is a house of mirrors. Each reflection fears another. Outside, rebellion brews. Across the colonies, independence movements have torn Spain's empire apart. Mexico, Peru, Chile, each gone, each declaring itself free while the king counts the cracks in his mirrors. Within the peninsula, liberals and absolutists wage a quieter war of pamphlets and conspiracies. Ferdinand answers with decrees written in his own hand, each one angrier, each one shorter, until even his signature seems to tremble. As his health collapses, the palace becomes an infirmary of superstition. Doctors in white gloves move like ghosts through the halls. They whisper theories of royal exhaustion and mystical afflictions. Priests sprinkle holy water over doorknobs and pillows. At night, Maria Cristina hears her husband pacing, muttering half-prayers to saints whose names blur into curses. The queen prays as well, but her prayers are practical ones. She begs for an heir, and finally, against all expectation, she conceives. The announcement shocks the court. After 3 dead queens and decades of doubt, the news is treated as divine intervention. Bells ring across Madrid. Priests proclaim a miracle. For the first time in years, Ferdinand smiles for the public. But the old fears never leave him. He orders guards outside Maria Cristina's chamber day and night, convinced enemies will poison the unborn child. Even in her confinement, the queen feels the palace breathing around her, watchful, jealous, afraid. The death of Ferdinand VII is announced at dawn. Outside the palace, the people watch the sky as if expecting a sign. None comes. The king's body is carried to a private room lit by a dozen candles. Physicians gather once more, scalpels gleaming beside silver crucifixes. The autopsy is ordered, but its findings will never be made public. The church seals the report. The physicians vanish from record. Rumors spread that what they found was unfit for a king, that his body bore marks of divine punishment, though no one dares explain what that means. Maria Cristina weeps beside the shrouded corpse, aware that her own reign has begun beneath the shadow of this silence. Spain stands at the edge of civil war, split between those who want her daughter as queen and those who demand a male heir. Outside, the bells toll again, this time not for a miracle, but for a reckoning. In the chamber, the mirrors have been covered in black cloth. The candles gutter and hiss. If one were to lift a corner of that cloth, perhaps the reflection would still show the king watching, unable to look away from his own undoing. His body will rest in the royal crypt, preserved in silence. But the kingdom he leaves behind remains trapped in his image, a house of mirrors, forever afraid of the light.